Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining Primary Care Workforce Innovation Learning Session conference call. Your host for today is Dinah Bungs. Ms. Bungs, you may begin.
Thank you, Alma. Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. We are pleased that everyone was able to join us for this learning session webinar. And as already announced, my name is Dinah Bungs and I will be your facilitator for the day. Before going much further on, I just wanted to go through a quick checklist of items for this webinar. The slides were emailed to you, but we will share them again so that you will have easy access to them. Please feel free to submit your questions via the chat feature as they come up. We will be pausing throughout the session to review the chat box and to answer your questions. Currently, your phone lines have been muted, but when we do pause for questions, the operator will come on and assist in opening your lines if you have any questions. This webinar will be recorded, and we will make it available to you once it's ready to be shared. And finally, I will give you a very brief tour of the features just so you know where everything is. So this is just a screenshot of the webinar, and you see the arrows. The red ones are in case you're just dialing in by phone, but I'm also using a pointer to highlight the different items in yellow. Should you have any issues, at the very top left-hand portion, you do have a raised hand, and I'll see that you're having some kind of a question or some kind of problem, and then I can help address that. If everybody could just click on that, I just want to make sure that it is coming through. So feel free, look at that. I see lots of hands going up, and thank you. And then the other feature is here toward the bottom, so we're looking at the bottom right-hand side. This is where you would enter in your chat questions, so certainly feel free to use that. Pop in those chat questions anytime throughout the presentation. That's the basic view of the webinar page, so it's pretty simple. And I think with that, we can actually continue on with the actual presentation. So the two main topics are going to be performance measures and time series. The performance measures is going to be probably more of a brief primer on statistical definitions of the different types of data that you may be encountering throughout this project. We'll take a look at nominal data, ordinal data, interval data, and finally, we're going to look at some rates and percentages. And then toward the other portion of the webinar, we're going to look at how to analyze time series using trends, lines of best fit, run charts, and control charts. Just a note of what we will not be covering today. We won't be covering any plan, do, study, or plan, check, act cycles. As we go through this, you'll probably see there's a very strong link when you're looking at time series analyses and those types of cycles, but we're going to devote our time to analyzing time series and not how to implement them as part of the PDSA or PDCA cycles. We're not going to be looking at robust evaluation methodologies. We're only going to look at some basic time series analysis features. And we're also not going to be delving deeply into any major quality improvement program design. So it's only going to be focusing on basic performance measures and then time series analyses. With that, actually, I'd like to just open up the very first polling question. And this is just going to give me a sense of where everybody stands in their comfort level with performance measures. And if you could just click on whichever answer you feel is most appropriate for you, indicating how familiar you feel with performance measures. I'm seeing the tallies come in. I think you might see them shortly, I think. I'll give it another couple more seconds. I feel like I'm on the, what is it, there was that dial in a friend or whatever where you see all those votes coming in along the way. I think that's about it. So I'm just going to share the results. You should see that everybody feels somewhat familiar with, but we do have a couple of people that are completely unfamiliar, and this is their first time learning about performance measures. So hopefully I'll be able to make it an engaging webinar for everybody, but certainly ask questions if you have any. So I'm going to start diving into performance measures. Performance measures, you may also hear them referred to as process measures, outcome measures, and that's from the December session, but also many other people may refer to those as performance measures. You may also hear them called indicators, metrics, and of course your own organization may have its own internal words for performance measures. But a very basic working definition for a performance measure: a good performance measure gives you the necessary information to make decisions about what to do. So that's a very basic definition, but I very much appreciate it because I think if you just look at the underlined portions, it covers what is really necessary for you as a quality improvement person or somebody who's trying to implement any kind of change. And I think just starting with the first underlined words there, necessary information, is one of those key items. If we look back to our December learning session when we talked about good measures being plausible, measurable, practical, and movable, those start explaining what a necessary type of measure is. And the other aspect to necessary information is you don't want to over-measure and get bogged down by so much information, so much data that you're just stuck and you can't come to a decision because there's always more data to look at. And at the same time, you don't want to under-collect or collect data that is too much of an overview level, because then you won't be able to make adequate decisions about what your next step might be. And obviously, this is probably the only portion that'll relate very strongly back to that PDSA cycle. And if you're looking in that cycle, it's probably that S portion. So that study portion, or if you're looking at the PDCA cycle, the check cycle, and how important it is to return to that to figure out what's going on, what kind of decision you need to make, and then what do you need to implement to move things forward. So just some basic categories of performance measures and looking a little bit beyond just the clinical approaches. So in that first box, effectiveness. So basically what you're trying to answer there is, are you reaching your goal? So you're looking at the degree to which your output is actually meeting whatever your particular requirements are. If you look at the next box, that's looking at efficiency. So here we're looking at your time needed to invest in whatever your intervention is, resources, costs, things like that. So here you're looking at the degree to which output is meeting your goals at a minimum resource cost, because just because you're meeting your goal doesn't necessarily mean that you're meeting it efficiently. If you need to spend millions upon millions of dollars to be effective at a given task, it may not be a very efficient task for you. Or if it requires more staff than you have allotted, again, that may be an indication that whatever you're doing is not necessarily efficient. Quality. Here you can start looking at very familiar things such as patient satisfaction, employee satisfaction, but there are many other quality measures. And again, that's looking at how well are you meeting those goals and expectations. Timeliness. Again, you're looking at two different components when you're considering timeliness. You're looking at how quickly it was performed or how much time something took to perform, as well as was that item correct. So did you do that task correctly? Because simply doing it fast but it's not correct doesn't necessarily result in an optimal outcome. So it's combining those two concepts, time and if something was done correctly. So you could consider something like a patient calls into the office and they want to set up an appointment. So how quickly is the frontline staff member able to pull up the scheduling timesheet as well as that patient's information, and that it's also the correct patient's information, and that it's also the correct calendar information. Productivity, this is where you're looking at value added. So you're looking at, given the extra cost or time or resource that this new activity is requiring, is there a final value that you can add and say, yes, we are now capable of producing a greater revenue source, or we can see more patients throughout the day. So looking at those kind of items, value add is a very important measure. And finally, safety. Obviously, I'm not going to spend too much time there, but obviously safety and safety for your patients, safety for family and caregivers, and safety for your employees is absolutely paramount. So we're going to move on to levels of measurement. So this is just going to be that basic statistics primer, and we're going to look at these 4 types of data. So nominal level data. The basic definition, type of data that occurs in categories without any order. So for instance, it does not matter if I say male and then female, and it doesn't matter if I say female and then male. There is no inherent order to these types of data. It's typically qualitative data, and when you're looking at this type of data, you cannot do any kind of addition with it. You can't subtract, you can't multiply it or divide it. So you really can't do much more than just count it. So some examples would be yes, no. So yes, somebody made an appointment. No, they did not make an appointment. Yes, somebody attended a training. No, they did not attend a training. Male, female, we already spoke about that a little bit. But another item would be looking at languages spoken, and I know for some of the practices here, that's a pretty important item. And again, if you look at languages spoken, you may have multiple, so not just 2 items. You may have, for instance, Spanish, English, Korean, Hindi, and any number of languages. We're going to move on to the next one. I see there's a question in the chat, and we'll get to that shortly. Ordinal data. Here we're looking at type of data that can be put into categories by some type of order. And we'll take a look at the examples on the other side of the slide here. They can be qualitative and quantitative. You can't easily add or subtract, multiply, or divide them. And if you take a look at something like the PCMH levels, so PCMH level 3 is higher than level 2, but it's not necessarily 3 times higher. It's just a different category. And just by virtue of what PCMH levels are, you can say that, 3 is higher than 2, 3 is higher than 1. But you cannot equate any kind of level of difference to them, really. So some examples, we already noted PCMH levels, meaningful use stages, patient satisfaction, so you can look at very satisfied, satisfied, not satisfied. Again, those are categories that you can put into some kind of order. And the other one would be looking at clinical categories or levels. So for instance, you may have diabetic patients, and you can place them into specific categories based on their blood glucose results or any other lab results. So that may help you better set up maybe support groups and things like that, because you want to help patients that have higher levels of need and things like that. We're going to move on now to interval data. Now we're getting to even more robust data. So the basic definition here is you're looking at a type of data that has inherent order and an equal value between each measure. So that's kind of a strange statement, but I guess the easiest way to explain it is if you're looking at weight. So if you look at the scale, 5 pounds is 5 pounds. So it doesn't matter if you take 205, subtract 200 from it, those are 5 pounds. same as if you go 105 pounds and decrease it to 100 pounds. Those are still the same 5 pounds no matter where exactly you are on that scale. These are now just about always quantitative data, and you can finally really start to manipulate this type of data mathematically. So basic examples, you're looking at continuous data and you're looking at discrete data. Continuous data, just as that basic stats primer there, easiest ones to look at are weight. So you could have somebody who's 125 pounds, next person is 125.3, 125.7, 126 pounds, and so forth, on and on and on. And you can break it down further and further and further. If you're looking at discrete data, you can be one number or another number. So if you look at something like seizures per month, you can have 1 seizure per month, you can have 2 seizures, 3 seizures, but you cannot have 2.5 seizures or 3.75 seizures per month. Same thing with trainings. You can attend 1 training per year, 2 trainings, but you cannot attend 7.5 trainings per year. So that's the basic difference there between continuous and discrete data. And finally, we're going to take a look at rates and percentages. So this is basically where it all starts coming together for you, because rates start to bring meaning to those measures, and that's probably one of the most important things when you're looking at basic types of analysis. So now you're looking at presenting that data using a numerator and denominator. So a very simple approach here would be a numerator. You're looking at the number of patients that kept their appointment over a denominator of number of patients that made an appointment. So the most important item here is that you can actually start to measure effect. So for instance, if I say for a patient wait time, it's 20 minutes, that's information. But if I start looking at it with a concept of using rates and percentages, you can start looking at patient wait time in minutes among the group that received a reminder phone call, and you could start comparing it to other groups, patients that were maybe walk-ins, patients that did not receive a reminder phone call. So you could be looking perhaps at patients with a reminder phone call had now a time of 18 minutes for wait time versus those that were walk-ins perhaps had 22 minutes where they did not receive a reminder call. So it starts giving you a lot more information, and you can start reacting to it. The one thing that I did not note here, but I think it's very important, is keep in mind small sample sizes, because they can produce some pretty major fluctuations when you're looking at rates and percentages. So if you just think of, 1 out of 2, all of a sudden that's 50%. If you look at 1 out of 4, you're looking at 25%. And those are some pretty big fluctuations to start seeing in your numbers. So always when you're looking at rates and percentages, keep in mind what your raw data is. What are the actual numbers? And that may give you some more information there. So just some quick examples of rates and percentages. So 85% of patients are highly satisfied with their front desk experience. 20% decrease in wait times since last quarter. And often when you start looking at those improvements, you want to compare them over time, so taking the same amount of time that you're looking at. And returning to those very basic types of data, languages spoken, but now when you start looking at it as your entire patient population, it starts giving you meaning. So now you know how many of your patients are speaking Spanish as their primary language, English, Hindi, Korean. So it starts bringing together all the different types of data for you. I'm going to move on to the next slide, and this is actually going to give us a chance to pause and take some questions. I'm going to take a look at that chat question here, and the chat question actually is pretty basic. Can you send the PowerPoint? Absolutely. This question came from Kathy. We will be sending out the chat questions, and I'm going to ask if the operator, Alma, can join us and see if there are any questions in the phones, and she'll also instruct how you can join that. And if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put them in by chat. And while we wait, I'm actually going to put up the next slide, next polling question. And this is just going to give me a sense of how well I did with explaining performance measures for you. So if you can indicate if you think you've actually gained some knowledge based on this, but certainly be honest. If I did not do a good job, I definitely want to hear that. I'm going to wait just a few more minutes here. Operator, if you could please let us know how to have people ask some questions by queue, that would be great.
Yes, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, if there's any questions, please press the number 1 key on your phone. Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press the number 1 key on your phone. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you would like to ask a question, please press the number 1 key on your phone. Ms. Bungs, there are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay, thank you, Alma. I'm going to continue on, but obviously if you do have any questions, feel free to chat them in or hold on to your question for a little bit later on. So now we're going to start moving into time series, and I'm going to do the same approach here. I just want to get a sense of where everybody is when it comes to their familiarity with time series analysis. So another quick poll here. So if you can indicate how familiar you are with time series. Again, same kind of levels, if you're very familiar or if this is the first time that you're hearing about them. Looks like a couple more are coming through. And I'm going to share those results now. So it looks like we've got a few people that feel quite comfortable with them, but we do have a fair amount that are either somewhat or slightly familiar. So I hope I can give people a little bit more information about them and maybe move some more people, and hopefully they'll gain some knowledge. Okay, so moving on into kind of a working definition again, time series chart. Quite basically, it's just a graphical display of data points plotted over time, and this would be the show and tell portion of the webinar. So it's quite simple. You can use Excel to set this up, and the most traditional time series chart is going to have, on the horizontal axis, is going to have whatever your time happens to be. So you can be measuring it by days, you can be measuring by weeks, by months, whatever makes sense for your particular intervention. And then along the vertical axis, that's where you're going to be measuring your particular intervention outcome or output. So that could actually be a count, it could be minutes like we have here in this particular example, or it could also be a rate. So again, it would be dependent upon your particular intervention and which measure makes most sense to track it. So let's take a quick look at some variation concepts and time series. So the first item to think about here is common cause variation. So this is just random variation around a mean. It happens all the time. You cannot control it. It's simply variation that exists. If you look at special cause variation, this is now looking at non-random variation. So this could be everything from external factors, things like new clinical definitions, or perhaps your EHR vendor merged with another EHR. That's an external factor that may all of a sudden cause some very significant variation in your data, and it's not just happening by random effect. They may also be internal factors. So perhaps you've hired new staff. Perhaps you yourself have implemented a new EHR system. Maybe you've moved to a new geographic location or You've redesigned some of your exam rooms. Those are all internal factors that may end up producing some non-random variation. And ultimately, your particular intervention should actually cause some non-random variation. Because if we look at the bottom here, improvement is a special cause variation. Because you are looking for whatever measures you're tracking over time for those to actually change, and for that change to be actually non-random variation. So the two goals that you're looking at here, you're looking at a decrease in the spread of points around the mean. In other words, you're looking at all the numbers to start becoming tighter around the mean. And the other one, this is actually a pretty big one, is you're actually able to move your mean. So if we're continuing on with that concept of wait time, you may end up being able to go from 22 minutes average wait time and decreasing it to 20 minutes wait time. So that is non-random variation, and that is actually the sign of improvement there. We're going to move on to the next concept here. So the benefits of tracking data over time. It's a little bit busy, so I'm going to walk you through this slide. And actually, these graphs here come from the Perla article that was sent to everybody, and I will also resend that along with the slides. It's a great article. I do invite everybody to read it. But the main concept to think about, and I'll explain it using these different charts, is that using data that you're tracking over time preserves that specific time order of that data. So if we look on the left-hand side, here we have two bar charts. And in the Perla article, what they did was they looked at 3 hospital units, and they were looking at how much time different tasks took to accomplish. And essentially in that bar chart, all they're looking at is combining all the data for these 3 units, and they're looking at it pre and post. So we're looking at 70 minutes versus 30 minutes after the particular change was implemented. It's information. It certainly shows you that whatever this intervention, it worked, but it's actually quite limited in the amount of information it gives you. Because when you move over to the 3 different charts on the right-hand side here, this is breaking down each one of those 3 units, and they're all collecting the same exact measure. The one item that they all have in common is that they all implemented their change in June, as you can see here by the arrow, yet they all had very different measures before the particular change. Unit 1 had a general downward trend, but fluctuating up and down quite a bit, versus Unit 2, also a downward trend, but it was a fairly consistent downward trend. They did not have a lot of fluctuation. And again, before the change in Unit 3, a lot of fluctuation up and down, probably even more so than Unit 1. However, after the particular change, everybody took a slightly different data journey, basically, and you can see that. Units 1 and Units 3 actually had some pretty marked decreases initially, right after this change was implemented, yet after some time, and I think we're all familiar with this, you keep your numbers down low, and then they slowly start creeping up, or they fluctuate up and down as they did for Unit 1. Versus Unit 2, obviously they had a very different, just steady decline. So that's one of the biggest reasons why you want to consider keeping these time series, because it gives you a lot more information, and you can actually see how that intervention changed over time. With that, I'm going to move on to the next slide here. We're going to take a look at these 4 different types of time series analyses. And if we look at them in increasing rigor, the control chart is considered the most rigorous, followed by the run chart, then lines of best fit, and then just general trends. Today we're going to spend most of our time talking about the run chart. So the first one, we're going to start from just identifying a trend and just a very non-statistically based three-in-a-row concept. It's looking at the Baldrige definition of a trend. And basically, there it's looking for three measured data points, all moving in the same direction, so moving down or moving up. And if you do have that, that's the indications of a trend. So the main benefit here is that you can start looking at your data with just a few data points. So that last point there, early indication of change, that's very key, because if you do implement a particular intervention, you want to start seeing, okay, are you seeing any results? So if you're not seeing any results, some questions that you may want to start asking is, are you measuring the correct output or the correct outcome? Perhaps whatever measure you're looking at is too distant from that particular intervention. Perhaps it's a question of your rollout. Maybe you need to do more education. Maybe you need to train some staff. So that's why just looking at that basic three-in-a-row concept of a trend, it gives you very early feedback as to whether or not you're starting to see any changes take place. So it's not very robust, but it's still a very good place to start when you're implementing your first changes. The next item is looking at a line of best fit. So this is going back to, math class and looking at statistics. So you have lots of data points, and you use a linear regression to plot a line that indicates which direction your improvement is going, and also how robust that improvement might be. And what you're looking for is a change in the direction of your slope, perhaps, or you're looking at the steepness of that particular line of best fit. Basically, the way to look at a line of best fit is it's a very good visual observation, and then you back it up with some basic statistical analysis to demonstrate whether or not you have a non-zero slope, or, in other words, a flat line, which would indicate no change. So just a few points to consider when you're looking at lines of best fit. A steep slope does not necessarily immediately mean better performance. It may be caused by some fluctuation over time. I'm being told that there's a hand up. I don't see a hand up. That's okay. I always have people as backup in my room, and they thought they saw a hand go up, so they wanted to bring my attention to it. So returning back to just those few points to consider, so the steepness of slope does not necessarily immediately mean better performance. Some of that may be due to fluctuation in your data. You may have some very high points, low points, and all of a sudden that's going to make your line appear much steeper. And that may also be a result of small sample size, where you all of a sudden have your rates or counts going up and down an awful lot if you have a small sample set. And the other item to consider when you're looking at lines of best fit are outliers. Outliers may also all of a sudden result in a large change in the steepness of your curve or in the steepness of your line, and it may also, in some rare instances, result in the change of direction of your slope. So those are just some items to keep in mind as you're using lines of best fit. So I'm going to now take a look at the control chart, and then we'll spend the rest of the time looking at that run chart. So the control chart is considered, when you're looking at time series analysis, one of the most robust approaches. And what you're doing here is you're plotting your data points against an average. You're plotting it against a mean. So the other item that you include when you're looking at a control chart is you introduce control limits to better analyze those points. So I'm going to introduce the chart itself here. So I'm going to get my pointer back out. So again, along the bottom you have your time. So it doesn't matter if you're looking at it by days, weeks, months, whatever makes sense for you. And it's some kind of a measure. It doesn't even matter what the particular measure is in this case, because this is just for illustration purposes. And the key thing with this control chart is that you are using your central line as the average, so it's the mean. You plot that right along the middle, and then you also add into that control chart the upper control limit here and the lower control limit. And you can include various different standard deviations from the average to better help you determine how robust this data is. So if we take a look at just a few of the X's along this chart here, we can start seeing the impact of using this kind of a chart. So if you look at the uppermost X here, this is actually above your upper control limit. So this is a cause for concern to figure out, whatever it is you're measuring, this would be a number that you would need to pay attention to. And then if you look at some of the other X's, yes, you do have a decline here, but you're also looking at a number that's now over 2 standard deviations from the average versus in this area you're looking at something that's over 1 standard deviation from the average. So it gives you a much more robust look at your data using some much more involved statistical analysis. And when we were talking about that concept of your data becoming tighter around the average, that would be that concept here that you would want to be in this closest standard deviation around that mean for this particular data. And that would be an indicator that your data is becoming more stable and so forth, that it's no longer fluctuating dramatically. We're going to move on now to the run chart itself. So again, you're plotting points along a time series. However, this time you're looking at it in relation to the median. You do need many data points, so it's more than just 3 or 4 data points. I don't know of a hard and fast minimum, but 10 is kind of a basic starting point. If you look at the Perla article, for some of the different types of rules that they use for evaluations, you do need at least 10 points to start with. And the thing is, it's a very simple approach to identify those non-random patterns, and it's based on statistically significant methodologies. So when I say it's easy to do, you can do it very quickly. Just using Excel, you enter in all your data by time and put in your measures. You plot a simple line chart, calculate the median, and you can even just print out that chart, use a ruler and highlighter or colored pen and draw in that median line and start counting where your points are against that median. And we're going to start getting into some of the basics about a run chart. So counting runs. What is a run? It's more than 1 consecutive data point that falls. That would be the first typo that I found on the same side of the median. So we're going to start taking a look at how to actually look at those runs. Basically, you're connecting those different data points, and each one of those lines is considered a run as long as you're on the same side of the median. And we're going to take a look at those 4 rules that Perla identified, and those 4 rules are shift, trend, number of runs, and you're trying to see if you have too few runs or too many runs crossing that median. And we're also going to very briefly talk about astronomical data points. So the rules in review. Shift, according to PERLA, you're looking at 6 or more consecutive points above or below the median, and they all have to be above the median or all have to be below the median. If you're looking at trends, now you're looking at 5 or more consecutive points that are going up or going down, and they all have to be going up or down. You can't have 4 out of 5 or 3 out of 5. All 5 or more need to be going in the same direction. Runs. Basically what you're looking for here is a non-random pattern of too few or too many runs crossing the median. And when we look at the chart, it'll be a little easier to explain that. But essentially, the concept here is that if you have just random variation, your data points will go up and they'll go down and they'll go up and they'll go down in some kind of non-random, in some kind of a random pattern, and they will naturally cross that median. But if it's some kind of a non-random pattern, you'll result in either too many crossings of that median or too few. And to give you a sense of how many crossings of that median are considered too few or too many, I invite you to look back to the PERLA article and look at table number 1. And that gives you a sense of what are the expected minimums and the expected maximums of crosses across that median. And then the last item is the astronomical data point. And basically, this is where you have to bring in some just subjective interpretation to figure out what may have caused that. So if we're now looking at the different types of situations that PERLA indicated, in this first upper left-hand chart here, we're looking at shift. So this was looking at those 6 or more consecutive points either above the median or below the median. And if you'll notice, it doesn't matter if they're going up or down as long as you have 6 or more points completely above the median or completely below the median. In the next one, if we're looking at trends, this was that where you need to have all the points going up or all the points going down. And here you're looking for at least 5 or more, every single one of those points going up or down. If you do have, and it's a little hard to see here, if you do have points that are actually going from, I don't know if that's 15 going to 15, you just ignore that and you move on to the next count, because that's considered basically a 0. Going 15 to 15 doesn't indicate going up or down. But you still have the entire group of data points here. All of them are trending upwards. Now, this is that concept of number of runs, and you're looking for a minimum or maximum and to see whether or not you're in that particular window. So in this case, PERLA was expecting there to be a total number of 2 runs crossing that line. However, they only had 1 run here crossing the line, which in this particular case was deemed to be too few. So that obviously is an indication of non-random variation. So I do invite you to take a look at the table in the article, and that'll help give you a sense of how many times you could expect your data to cross over that median line. And rule number 4, this is that astronomical data point. And I think always, in my mind at least, the first thing to do when you have an astronomical data point where it's either much, much lower than expected or much higher, first double check whether or not that data point was entered incorrectly. Did you add in a decimal when there shouldn't have been a decimal point, or did you delete a decimal point? So first just check that that data point is correct. And if it is correct, then it's starting to interpret what might be going on there. So it's an absolutely subjective analysis there. I'm going to turn off the pointer and just kind of go through just a quick synopsis of how to have success with performance measures and time series charts. So just those quick points to get started. Return to those rates and measures. Use them to measure the effect of your particular intervention. The next one is collect and plot data over time, and use those basic trends to start yourself off and see, are you seeing any kind of meaningful change occur? Over time, you can use lines of best fit, and hopefully you can also use some run charts. And the other item is I very strongly encourage you to annotate your chart. So mark up that chart. Include things like milestones, include things like goals and charts, and also note any major internal or external factors that may have occurred. So this is now just a very basic annotated chart using that patient wait time concept again. So just note on there, this was the start of my intervention here in February. You can see it had a beautiful trend downward. Perhaps you started seeing more patients, and all of a sudden you had a major increase in the wait times again. You're able to hire some new staff, and you've been able to improve your throughput, and that way you've also reduced your patient wait times. And again, you're seeing that number go down for wait times, but something else has occurred. Maybe now it's peaking back up. So it's very important to try to note all those different changes, whether you're looking at the start of your intervention or any major changes that have occurred. So I basically invite you to try that run chart. It's a remarkably simple yet incredibly powerful tool because you can identify non-random patterns just by counting. And I mean, these are statistically significant non-random patterns that you're going to be identifying, and all you have to do is count. I know it sounds very simple, but the first time I used this for a provider I was working with, you actually saw that I actually saw a shift. It was very exciting. It's one of those you feel like you just won the lottery, and you're recounting those numbers again to make sure you saw it correctly. But it's actually a very simple tool, and it's quite powerful, so I do invite you to use it. So I'm going to ask for the operator to get ready to take some questions. I'm going to do the polling question here, and I'm also going to take a look at the chat box because it looks like there might be some questions in there. So while we wait for those questions to come up, I invite you to take a look at that polling question. Again, be honest. If you don't feel that you learned anything new, certainly do check on that no box because I do want to know how I can better help everybody. So I'm going to release the poll now, and I'm going to take a look at the chat box question there from Dr. Clark. And I'm also going to ask if Alma, the operator, can, again, indicate how people can get into the phone queue if they want to.
Yes, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, if you'd like to ask a question, please press the number 1 key on your phone. Again, if you have any questions, please press the number 1 key on your phone.
So the question from Dr. Clark is part of the definition of a shift that the 6 points are on the opposite side of the median line as what came before. So generally, yes, that would be what you're looking for because when you're starting off with your baseline data, it'll be most likely fluctuating up and down and all around that median, most likely and hopefully actually in some kind of a random pattern. And then once you get to that point after the intervention, that shift should be on one or the other side of the median. So depending on which direction you're hoping your data should be going, it would either be an increase in whatever that number is or a decrease. So I hope that answers your question, and if it doesn't, certainly chime in by phone or type in your questions in the chat box. Excellent. You're welcome, Dr. Clark. If there are any other questions, certainly chat them in, or Alma, do we have anybody on the line?
Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you have a question, please press 1. There are no questions in queue at this time.
Okay. I'm going to actually then move into the final polling question just to get a sense of what you thought about this particular webinar. And we'll be sending out the slides as well as the Perla article again. And as soon as the recording is ready, then we'll also make that available. So if anybody has questions, by all means, do reach out to us. So please let us know if you think you found this to be a good session or not. And again, please be honest. I don't mind harsh criticism, so that's okay as well. Okay, so I think we might have just about all the polls in there. With that, I do thank everybody for their time. And I think we'll be in touch. Certainly look out on your email for the resources coming your way. And certainly take a look at the Perla article. I think it's a very good resource, and it's a very easy thing to implement, and I certainly invite you to take a look at using a run chart. With that, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This concludes today's teleconference. You may all disconnect.